Maple Grove Park on autumn afternoons always exudes a peaceful beauty, tinged with a subtle loneliness. The leaves turn golden, falling slowly with each gentle breeze, covering the small paths winding through the park. The quiet is so profound that one can hear the soft footsteps of someone passing by or the distant laughter of children playing on the slides. In a secluded corner near the lake, on an old stone bench, Mr. Samuel Carter sits quietly as he does every day. He is about 70 years old, a slender black man with a strangely upright and dignified posture. His faded brown suit, worn fedora, and scuffed leather shoes make him appear as though he belongs to a different time. Yet, if one looks closely, they can see his eyes remain bright and sharp, like two black stones piercing through layers of time and age. Samuel enjoys coming to this park every day. It is a place where he can sit for hours, observing the world around him transform while no one notices his presence. A thin book rests on his lap, but he does not read it. His eyes gaze out at the lake, where the evening sun paints the water's surface in a vivid orange-red glow. The way he sits there, calm and silent, makes it feel as though he is a part of the park itself. No one knows who he is, and no one cares. Samuel Carter, the quiet and mysterious man, is seen as nothing more than a lonely old man in the eyes of those around him. In the distance, the sound of pigeons' wings flapping rises as a group of teenagers appears. Their shadows stretch long across the narrow path, gliding over patches of fallen leaves. 5 teenagers entered the park like a strange gust of wind, shattering the peace. Leading the group was Tyler, a 17-year-old boy with messy blonde hair and eyes that always carried a hint of defiance. He wore a tattered black leather jacket, the kind of street fashion that screamed rebellion. Following Tyler were Jake, Ryan, Connor, and Matt, each carrying the same carefree arrogance of youth. The group moved with unshakable confidence, as though the park were their personal stage. Tyler kicked an empty soda can far into the distance, the metallic clang echoing through the still air, drawing laughter from the group. "This place is so boring," Jake said, shrugging. "It's like a graveyard here all the time. Let's find something fun to do." Tyler smirked, his gaze sweeping across the park like a predator searching for prey. Then his eyes landed on old Samuel Carter. The elderly man sat on the stone bench, seemingly oblivious to the presence of the teenagers. "Look over there." Tyler jerked his chin toward Samuel, his voice laced with mockery. "What's the old black guy doing there? Waiting for a bus or something?" The group burst into laughter. Jake nudged Tyler's shoulder, snickering. "Don't tell me he fell asleep there. He looks like a statue." Samuel didn't turn his head, ignoring the laughter and jeers. He was used to this, young people looking for attention, trying to assert their dominance. Tyler's smirk faltered, dissatisfied with Samuel's silence. He took a few steps closer, his voice dripping with provocation. "Hey, old man, what are you doing here? Huh? Got no home to go to?" Samuel lifted his head. For a brief moment, his eyes met Tyler's, sharp and steady. Without a word, he turned away, his gaze returning to the lake. That silence was like a slap to Tyler's pride. His jaw tightened, and he sneered, tilting his chin toward his friends. "See that? The old man thinks he's too good for us. I'll make him talk." Tyler took a few more steps, standing directly in front of Samuel. He leaned forward, his voice nearly a growl. "Hey, old man, can you hear me or what?" Samuel remained silent. He looked up at the teenager in front of him with calm indifference, as though Tyler were nothing more than a passing breeze. That composure ignited Tyler's anger. He turned and winked at his friends, motioning for them to come closer. Jake and Ryan burst into laughter as they began picking up small stones from the ground, tossing them toward Samuel. One stone hit his leg. Another struck the armrest of the bench. Samuel lowered his book, his eyes darkening. He still said nothing, but his aged face hardened like stone. Tyler crossed his arms, smirking. "What's the matter, old man? Are you scared? They're just little rocks." Slowly, Samuel stood up. His posture was unexpectedly straight. And for a moment, Tyler felt as though he were facing someone entirely different. The old man before him no longer seemed weak or pitiful. He stood like a monument, an unshakable mountain. "What do you want?" His voice was deep and steady. Tyler faltered for a second, but quickly recovered, his defiance returning. "We're just trying to help you have some fun. Don't you get bored sitting here all day?" Samuel met Tyler's gaze directly. "I don't need your kind of entertainment, and if you're wise, you'll leave now." His words hit like a cold blow, stripping Tyler of his amusement. But instead of retreating, Tyler's pride and anger flared up. He clenched his fists, stepping closer to the old man. The kids formed a small circle, surrounding Samuel. The atmosphere grew tense. Tyler reached out and gave Samuel's shoulder a light shove. "You dare talk back to me? You old." Before Tyler could finish his sentence, Samuel moved like lightning, grabbing the boy's wrist and twisting it back. The motion was simple yet forceful, sending Tyler stumbling. His friends gasped in shock. "Stop it!" Jake shouted. But it was already too late. Samuel released Tyler's wrist and took a step back. His gaze swept over the group, his voice calm yet firm. "This is the first and only warning. Learn to respect others." The group fell silent for a brief moment. Tyler stared at Samuel, his eyes a mix of confusion, anger, and a hint of fear. But the battle was far from over. As Samuel loosened his grip and stepped back, Tyler yanked his hand away, humiliation surging through him. He glanced down at his wrist. There wasn't a mark, but the shame cut deep, like an invisible scar. "Crazy old men like you think you can do something to us?" Tyler hissed through gritted teeth, his voice straining to mask the fear flickering inside him. His friends, Jake, Ryan, Matt, and Connor stood around, unsure and uneasy. A breeze swept through, carrying a few golden leaves and leaving behind an awkward, heavy silence. Samuel remained still, his eyes shining not with anger, but with a strange, unshakable resolve. For a fleeting moment, memories from his youth surged back like a relentless tide. 1958. Samuel Carter, just 18 years old, stepped into his first boxing ring. Back then, a black boy from a poor southern neighborhood in America had only two choices: sink into poverty and despair or fight to survive. Samuel chose to fight, both literally and figuratively. His trainer, an older man with graying hair named Joe Martin, often said, "Boxing isn't just about the strength of your fists, Samuel. It's about the strength of your will. You might get knocked down, but if you can still get back up, you haven't lost." Samuel had learned that lesson the hard way. The ring wasn't just a place to showcase his skill. It was where he fought against prejudice, insults, and the arrogance of his opponents. Over the years, Samuel became a legend, a renowned boxer nicknamed the Black Iron Fist. But eventually, age, injuries, and life's bitterness forced him to retire, leaving the ring behind. Samuel stepped away from the spotlight to live a quiet life. The present. Tyler and his friends had no idea they weren't facing a frail old man but a retired legend. Samuel looked at Tyler and let out a quiet sigh. In the teenager's defiance, he saw a reflection of his younger self, stubborn, arrogant, and unafraid. But Tyler's arrogance was just a facade. Beneath it lay wounds and loneliness he didn't yet understand. "I'll give you a chance," Samuel said, his voice calm and steady. "Go home and think about what you're doing. Don't waste your youth on meaningless things. Don't preach to me, old man," Tyler shouted, his patience snapping. "What we do is none of your business." Jake and Ryan picked up more stones and hurled them toward Samuel. This time, however, Samuel moved like lightning. He tilted his body, dodging each stone with an ease and precision that left the boys frozen in shock. Samuel stepped forward, his gaze sharp as steel. "I warned you." None of the teenagers had time to process what was happening as Samuel moved. The old man was no longer slow and frail as they had imagined. His movements were swift and deliberate, like a black panther in the jungle. Jake lunged first, aiming to shove Samuel hard in the shoulder. But in an instant, Samuel pivoted, grabbed Jake's arm, and used a simple boxing maneuver to push him aside. Jake hit the ground, his eyes wide with fear. What did you just do?" Jake stammered. Ryan, furious at seeing his friend humiliated, charged forward and threw a punch at Samuel. But the fist never found its target. Samuel tilted his head, dodging the strike effortlessly, then caught Ryan's wrist, squeezing just enough to make the boy freeze. "You're too green," Samuel said, releasing Ryan's hand. Tyler stood frozen, as though the ground beneath him had disappeared, watching his friends defeated in mere seconds. He began to realize a terrifying truth. This old man was not ordinary. "You think violence is strength?" Samuel asked, his voice commanding and firm. "Strength doesn't come from meaningless punches. It comes from control and respect for others." The group fell silent. Tyler looked down at the ground, his fists clenched tightly. He had never felt so humiliated. Samuel did not continue to attack. He simply stood there, like an unshakable mountain. Tyler and his friends felt as though they had just been swept up and tossed aside by a storm. "Go home," Samuel said one last time, "and think about what you've done." No longer daring to provoke him, the teenagers trudged out of the park. Tyler was the last to leave, turning back for one final glance. Samuel had returned to his seat on the stone bench, his posture peaceful and calm once again, as though nothing had ever happened. The group walked out of the park in silence. The sound of leaves crunching beneath their feet felt heavier than ever. Jake was the first to speak. "Who was that old man? How is he that strong?" Tyler didn't answer. Samuel's words still echoed in his mind. "Strength doesn't come from meaningless punches." That night, Tyler lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Frustration, shame, and confusion swirled within him. He recalled Samuel's eyes, not angry, but filled with disappointment. Why didn't he hit us harder? Why did he say those things? Tyler wondered. The next day, Tyler decided to return to the park alone. He didn't know why he was going back, whether it was for revenge or to find answers. But when Tyler approached the same stone bench as the day before, there sat the old man, Samuel Carter, holding a book in his hands, as calm and peaceful as ever. "Why are you back?" Samuel asked, his voice steady. Tyler stood there in silence, unsure of what to say. After a moment, he finally asked, "Who are you? Why are you so strong?" Samuel looked at him for a long moment and then smiled faintly. "Sit down, young man. If you truly want to know, I'll tell you my story." Tyler sat down on the bench across from Samuel, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. The morning air in the park was as quiet as usual. But this time, something was stirring inside Tyler. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a mix of curiosity and confusion. Samuel didn't look at Tyler right away. He opened the book resting on his lap, read a short passage, and then gently closed it. His aged yet vibrant eyes turned directly to Tyler. "You asked me who I am?" Samuel began, his voice deep and warm, yet brimming with quiet strength. "I used to be a boxer, one of the best in my time." Tyler's eyes widened in disbelief. "You were a boxer?" Samuel nodded. "Yes, but I don't say this to brag. I stood in some of the biggest rings, fought against the toughest opponents. But I also faced some of the darkest days." He paused, his gaze drifting into the distance. "I fought not just against opponents but against this society itself. For a black man back then, winning didn't mean glory. Winning just meant you were allowed to keep going." Tyler fell silent. Samuel's words hit him like waves crashing against an invisible wall he had built inside himself. He thought about his own life and his group of friends. Tyler, too, was fighting but in the wrong way. Memories surged back. Tyler hadn't always been a defiant troublemaker. He had once been a kind, eager boy who loved to learn and help his friends. But everything changed when his father abandoned the family. His mother, a woman consumed by alcoholism, left Tyler to endure long, lonely days. He stopped going to school, started hanging out with other lost and angry kids. Bullying others became his way of proving himself, his way of fighting back against a world that had rejected him. "You don't know anything about me," Tyler muttered, his voice breaking. Samuel studied him for a long moment before replying. "I know more than you think. I was once an angry boy just like you. I know what it feels like to be abandoned, to feel lost in this world." Samuel continued his story. He spoke about his impoverished childhood in the American South, where racial discrimination was a fact of life. He told Tyler how he had been called terrible names as a young boy simply because of the color of his skin, and how he learned that boxing was his path to survival. "Boxing taught me how to stand up after being knocked down," Samuel said, "but more importantly, taught me self-control. The strongest man isn't the one with the hardest punch, but the one who can stop himself from throwing a punch when it isn't needed." Tyler looked at him, overwhelmed with emotion. In his eyes, the old man before him was no longer weak or frail. He was a monument of strength and resilience, a man who had fought against adversity his entire life and still emerged with his dignity intact. Samuel raised his hand and gestured toward the park. "Look around, Tyler. There are children here, elderly people, and people like me, those who have spent far too much time learning to appreciate peace. Don't destroy it because of your fleeting anger." Tyler lowered his head. Those words pierced straight into his heart like an arrow. "You don't understand. I can't change. Everyone thinks I'm a failure." Samuel frowned and, to Tyler's surprise, suddenly stood up. "Do you want to change?" Tyler looked up at him, startled. "What did you say? Do you want to learn how to control yourself and find your true strength?" Samuel asked, his voice firm and unwavering. "If you want it, I will help you." Tyler was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. The next morning, Tyler arrived at the park early. He wasn't sure what he was doing there, but Samuel's offer had echoed in his mind all night. Like a small ray of light in the dark room Tyler had locked himself in for years. Samuel stood on an open patch of ground near the lake, holding a pair of old boxing gloves. His expression was serious as he looked at Tyler. "Starting today, I'll teach you what I learned from boxing. But first, I want you to understand one thing. Boxing is not violence. It's the art of self-control and respecting your opponent." Tyler frowned. "I don't care about all that philosophy. I just want to be stronger." Samuel chuckled, but his smile carried a weight of sternness. "You'll understand in time." The training began. Tyler felt as though his body was being wrung dry. Samuel didn't just teach him how to punch and dodge. He put him through grueling physical exercises, push-ups, jump rope drills, and laps around the park. "Boxing isn't just about your hands. It's about your entire body and your mind," Samuel said. After hours of training, Tyler collapsed onto the grass, sweat streaming down his face. "Are you trying to kill me?" he panted. Samuel smiled, looking at him like a teacher watching over his student. "This is just the beginning, Tyler." Day by day, Tyler continued returning to the park to train with Samuel. At first, he was resistant, but gradually, he began to feel something shifting inside him. "Mr. Samuel, why are you helping me?" Tyler asked one morning as they sat resting on the stone bench. Samuel looked at him, a gentle smile appearing on his face. "Because I see something in you, a fire that's about to go out. I don't want to see it wasted." Tyler fell silent, his eyes reflecting something even he couldn't name. He began to respect Samuel, not just as a teacher but as the father figure he had never had. Samuel didn't just teach Tyler boxing techniques. He also shared stories about patience, about how he had faced failure and suffering. "Life will always knock us down, Tyler, but the most important thing is whether we have the courage to get back up." Over weeks of training, Tyler began to change. He became calmer, stronger, and no longer sought attention through reckless actions. The meaningless punches he had once thrown were now transformed into a strength born of control and maturity. He realized that true strength didn't come from making others afraid but from mastering himself. Autumn slowly gave way to winter. The cold winds swept through Maple Grove Park, carrying the biting chill of nature. Tyler was no longer the reckless, defiant teenager he used to be. Instead, every morning, he showed up at the park, training under Samuel's strict guidance. Regular park visitors began to notice the change. They no longer saw groups of unruly teenagers causing trouble. There were no mocking laughs or pointless stones being thrown. Instead, Tyler had become part of the park, a teenager jogging through the early morning mist, diligently training as if it were the greatest mission of his life. One day, as Tyler was jumping rope, a familiar voice called out from behind him, "Tyler, what are you doing here?" He turned around. It was Jake and Ryan, his two closest friends from before. Both of them looked at him as if they'd just discovered something bizarre. Tyler dropped the rope and wiped the sweat from his forehead, but said nothing. "Don't tell me you're learning boxing with that old man?" Jake pointed toward Samuel, who was sitting on the bench in the distance, quietly observing Tyler. Tyler gritted his teeth, feeling a flicker of discomfort. "Yeah, so what?" Ryan burst out laughing. "Oh my God, have you lost your mind? That guy's just some poor old man. Don't tell me he's tricked you into this." Tyler clenched his fists, an all too familiar anger rising inside him. But this time, he remembered what Samuel had taught him. Strength isn't in the first punch. It's in the decision not to throw it. "Mr. Samuel isn't who you think he is," Tyler said, his voice unusually calm. "He's a legend." Jake and Ryan stared at him, dumbfounded, before bursting into laughter. "A legend? What are you, telling fairy tales now?" Tyler didn't argue. Instead, he turned back around and resumed his training. Samuel, watching everything from a distance, nodded subtly with a satisfied smile. After the encounter with Jake and Ryan, Tyler realized that his transformation couldn't please everyone. But instead of feeling angry or ashamed, he felt stronger. For the first time in his life, Tyler didn't care about other people's jeers anymore. Samuel decided it was time to introduce Tyler to a new challenge. "You've learned enough about strength and technique. Now it's time to test your spirit," Samuel said one cold morning. "Tomorrow, I'll take you to a special place." "Where?" Tyler asked curiously. Samuel only smiled mysteriously. "Show up on time, and you'll see." The next day, Samuel brought Tyler to an old boxing gym on the outskirts of the city. From the outside, the brick walls were cracked, and the iron doors groaned every time they opened. But as soon as they stepped inside, Tyler was amazed. The gym was alive with the rhythmic thuds of punching bags, encouraging shouts, and the thick scent of sweat from young fighters training with intensity. It wasn't a glamorous place, but it had spirit, something Tyler could feel immediately. "Welcome to Legacy Gym," Samuel said. "This is where I started my career. Today, you'll challenge yourself." Tyler looked around, feeling a hint of nervousness. He had never trained in a place like this, much less faced other fighters. Samuel handed him a brand new pair of boxing gloves. "Get in the ring," Samuel said. "I want to see what you've learned." Tyler swallowed hard. He stepped into the ring, facing an opponent a few years older than him, a tall, muscular young man with a challenging glare. "Don't be afraid," Samuel said. "Remember what I taught you. Stay calm, stay in control, and respect your opponent." The match began. Tyler felt an enormous pressure as his opponent attacked like a storm. But instead of panicking, he remembered Samuel's words. He moved swiftly, dodging punch after punch, waiting for his chance. Finally, the opportunity came. The opponent lost his balance for just a split second, and Tyler delivered a precise punch to his shoulder, forcing him to stumble back. The gym erupted in applause. From outside the ring, Samuel nodded with quiet approval. Well done, Tyler. You're starting to discover your true strength. A month later, Samuel made an unexpected suggestion. There's an amateur boxing tournament next week, he said. I want you to enter. Tyler froze. A tournament? But I'm not ready. No one is ever completely ready in life. Samuel replied. You've trained hard. Now it's time to test yourself and prove that you can stand on your own 2 feet. Tyler thought about it for a long time before nodding. He knew he had changed so much since meeting Samuel, and this tournament would be his chance to prove it. As the day of the competition approached, Samuel increased the intensity of Tyler's training. Tyler trained from morning until night, learning how to control his breathing, observe his opponents, and throw precise punches. Samuel reminded him every day, this isn't about winning or losing, it's about how far you've come. A month later, Samuel made an unexpected suggestion. There's an amateur boxing tournament next week, he said. I want you to enter. Tyler froze. A tournament? But I'm not ready. No one is ever completely ready in life. Samuel replied. You've trained hard. Now it's time to test yourself and prove that you can stand on your own 2 feet. Tyler thought about it for a long time before nodding. He knew he had changed so much since meeting Samuel, and this tournament would be his chance to prove it. As the day of the competition approached, Samuel increased the intensity of Tyler's training. Tyler trained from morning until night, learning how to control his breathing, observe his opponents, and throw precise punches. Samuel reminded him every day, this isn't about winning or losing, it's about how far you've come. That afternoon, after the tournament, Tyler sat on the steps of the Legacy Gym, his old boxing gloves resting beside his feet. The last rays of sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting his sweat-soaked, messy hair. Samuel stood nearby, arms crossed, quietly watching his student. I didn't win, Tyler said, his voice tinged with disappointment. Samuel smiled, stepped forward, and sat down beside Tyler. Who says you didn't win? Tyler frowned, turning to look at him. But the referee called it a draw. Sometimes, victory isn't about what others declare. Tyler, Samuel replied warmly. Today, you didn't lose to yourself. You stood strong. You were patient. And you fought with everything you had. That is the greatest victory you can achieve. Tyler lowered his head, a warm feeling spreading through his chest. The hands that once clenched in anger now rested loosely at his sides, and the pride he had once carried was replaced with quiet calm and self-respect. Why were you so patient with me? He asked after a long silence. I was a terrible person. Samuel chuckled softly. Because I saw in you the potential you couldn't see in yourself. When I was young, I was just as angry as you, but a mentor saved me, just like I'm saving you. Everyone deserves a second chance. Son. Tyler looked up at Samuel, his eyes shining with deep gratitude. For the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't alone anymore. News of Tyler and the tournament spread among his old group of friends. Those who once mocked and looked down on him now viewed him with different eyes. Some were envious, others admired him. But there were also people like Jake and Ryan, who began to see that Tyler's transformation was something truly admirable. One afternoon, Jake and Ryan showed up at Maple Grove Park. They stood at a distance from Samuel and Tyler, awkward and hesitant, like lost children. Samuel noticed them but simply smiled, pretending not to pay attention. Tyler walked over to them, his gaze direct and honest. What are you two doing here? Jake scratched his head awkwardly. We just wanted to see what you were up to. Ryan spoke up, his voice quieter. Tyler, you've changed. I don't get it, but maybe you were right. Tyler looked at his 2 old friends, remembering the days when the 3 of them wandered around, seeking validation in all the wrong ways. He no longer felt angry at them. Samuel had taught him how to let go of the burdens in his heart. Mr. Samuel can help you too, if you really want to change, Tyler said, turning toward the old man. He helped me. Samuel looked at them, his eyes kind yet sharp as always. Each of you has a path to choose. The question is, do you have the courage to take it? Jake and Ryan exchanged a glance. They didn't answer right away, but their eyes said everything. They were beginning to understand that change was waiting for them too, if only they had the courage to take the first step. Winter gave way to the warm days of early spring. Maple Grove Park was no longer a place of arguments and anger. It had become a destination of change and hope. Every morning, Samuel still sat on his old stone bench. But this time, he was no longer alone. Tyler and his group of friends, including Jake and Ryan, gathered at the park, training together under his guidance. "Look at that. That old man must have magic," a passerby remarked with a smile as they watched the scene. Tyler's punches were now firm, technical, and full of strength. But more importantly, there was no longer any anger or hatred behind them. He had learned to control himself, to respect his opponents, and most importantly, to respect himself. One day, after training had ended, Tyler sat down next to Samuel. The old man was as quiet and thoughtful as always, but in his aged eyes shone an unmistakable joy. "Thank you, Mr. Samuel," Tyler said softly, his voice full of sincerity. Samuel looked at him, offering a kind smile. "Thank you, Tyler. You've proven that a person can change their life simply by believing in themselves and walking the right path." One late afternoon, the sun dipped behind the trees, leaving a sky painted in brilliant shades of red and orange. Samuel sat on his familiar stone bench, but this time, he was no longer alone. Around him echoed the laughter of Tyler and his friends, kids who had once been lost but had now found their own path. Jake and Ryan, after a short time training, had changed remarkably as well. They were no longer rebellious teenagers blaming their circumstances. They had learned the value of effort, patience, and respect. Tyler sat down next to Samuel, gazing at the lake, where the water mirrored the glowing hues of the evening sky. "Mr. Samuel, you never told me why you spent so much time on us," Tyler said quietly. Samuel chuckled, his eyes filled with boundless kindness. "Because if no one had ever taken the time for me when I was young, I wouldn't be sitting here today." Tyler smiled, understanding the deeper meaning behind those words. Mr. Samuel was more than a mentor or a boxing legend. He was the person who had transformed a teenager's life and, in doing so, had touched the lives of so many others. That scene felt like a beautiful painting of harmony between generations, where lost children had found light in the darkness through the patience and guidance of someone who had walked the path before them. The sun set on the horizon, but within Samuel, Tyler, and his friends, a new dawn was beginning, a dawn of hope, growth, and renewed faith in life.